Isaiah 14. All right, everybody, let's get into this. I just looked at the time and I've got to hurry up. So, for the Lord will have compassion on Jacob and will again choose Israel. Now, interesting. Everybody who's reading chapters 13 and 14 see them as a pair, that they go together, that there's not like a hard break of, and now behold, something else. Another word of the Lord came to Isaiah. No. This is a continuation of chapter 13. Chapters 13 and 14 go together. And so you have this wrath of God on the earth by the way that he's using the Antichrist as his instrument. And then you have what God does to Israel. Okay. And this is one of the reasons why I would argue the wrath that is in chapter 13 is not against Israel. I think 14 is about Israel and 13 is about God addressing the sin of humanity beyond Israel. It's bigger than just the scope of Israel. But here we are. So we get into 14 and Isaiah describes God's deliverance of Israel and vulnerable nations from Babylon's systemized global oppression and the final defeat of the Antichrist, likening him to Satan personified. So one thing that does happen is as the Antichrist is being used by God to destroy Babylon at the end of the age, that destruction of Babylon is celebrated. That destruction of Babylon is actually a relief, in some sense, to nations who are being exploited by Babylon. Now, they're not happy that it's the Antichrist who inherits that wicked system and hijacks it for his own purposes, if you want to think about the mark of the beast and things like that. Oh my word, let's just go back. All right, come on. Chapter 10, I said we were going to go fast, but I'm telling you, here's the Antichrist. He says in chapter 10, starting in verse 13, by the strength of my hand I've done it, by my wisdom and my understanding I have removed the boundaries of the people and plundered their treasures. He is talking about Babylon here. I have plundered their treasures. He has taken hold of the centralized Babylon system and he hijacks it and it becomes the whole mark of the beast and all of that. That's, again, stuff Isaiah hasn't talked about yet, apart from these hints that we're getting here. But it's here. But it's also in chapter 13 and 14. So that's how these are going together. So here we go, 14. I swear we got to move faster. Here we go. For the Lord will have compassion on Jacob and will again choose Israel and will set them in their own land, and sojourners will join them and attach themselves to the house of Jacob. Now, what's interesting in these opening chapters is that Isaiah is describing kind of a role reversal, whereas in the tribulation, as the Antichrist is attacking Israel and they are forced to flee as refugees and as sojourners and joining themselves to nations into which they have been scattered. No, instead, the sojourners will be the other nations who are joining themselves to Israel. It's a role reversal that happens in Israel's final deliverance that is just a beautiful depiction of the fulfillment of God's covenant promises. And so that is what really is being described here in sort of the theme. God will have compassion on Jacob and will again choose Israel is also a callback to what Moses promised. Let's go. Moses, Deuteronomy 32, starting in verse 36. This is the song of Moses. For the Lord will vindicate his people and have compassion on his servants when he sees their power is gone. He's at the same point in kind of the redemptive plan. And Moses says, God is going to again choose his people. He's going to have compassion on them. And here Isaiah is promising the same thing. He will have compassion on them and choose Israel and will set them in their land, and the sojourners will join themselves to Jacob. And the peoples, the Gentiles, where they've been scattered into, will take them and bring them to their place. The Gentiles are going to assist in that regathering, bringing the Jewish refugees back to their place. And the house of Israel will possess them and the Lord's land as male and female servants. Now, what is that? Again, it's that role reversal where Israel had been taken captive. They will be given authority over their captors, even entire nations that have sought to supplant Israel and to dispossess them and the land and even exterminate the people themselves. No, instead, the Lord gives Israel governing authority over those who previously oppressed them. And you see that in the rest of that verse. They will take captive those who were their captors. and will rule over those who oppressed them. We've looked at that in Micah, let's see, some previous chapters of Isaiah, and more chapters are going to depict that. But even as they're in the process of being regathered, even Jewish refugees who've been scattered, Micah describes that they're being strengthened by the Lord as the Antichrist is returning to Israel. There's like a remote strengthening of Jewish refugees who are scattered, and even they are strengthened with the same messianic might of the messianic army that defeats those Antichrist armies. And so even those Israelis who are scattered around are strengthened and are even causing fear to grip the captors in distant places. So very interesting. Okay. Again, trying to move quickly here, but we did talk about that in previous chapters. You can go look at that in previous weeks. When the Lord has given you rest from your pain and turmoil and the hard service with which you were made to serve, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. Interesting. So here is Israel being delivered by the Lord. In that day, you're going to take up this taunt against those the Babylon system that oppressed the vulnerable and the poor. And I think this is more than just Israel, because this goes on to, the scope of this now expands beyond Israel to kind of the nations, the oppressed nations who were oppressed by this wicked Babylon system, who are going to take up this taunt, and they're going to describe in kind of a mocking tone kind of the oppression of what happened, and oh, how your tables have turned sort of sense. So I'm going to try to get through this quickly, but I want you to understand that as we read this, we can kind of reverse read. They're describing the oppression of the rebellion and the tribulation, all mingled into this. Even though they're taking up a taunt, their descriptions are like accurate descriptions of what they experienced. How the oppressor has ceased. Babylon being referred to as the oppressor. The insolent fury has ceased. And again, this is when Babylon has fallen because of the aggression of the Antichrist. And so they're celebrating the fall of Babylon, although it was at the hand of the Antichrist, but there's even more to be said about that here in a moment. But right now we're just looking at Babylon. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of rulers, and struck the staff and scepter which had struck the peoples with unceasing blows, and that ruled nations in anger with unrelenting persecution. Saying the power of this system had oppressed the nations, unrelenting persecution, unceasing blows. All of that has ceased. But then again, that for it to have ceased, it must have happened. So we see a description of the pressure of that Babylon system and its oppression on the vulnerable and the weak. The whole earth is at rest and quiet. They break forth into singing. This interesting peace that settles on the destruction of this oppressor. The cypresses rejoice at you. They rejoice at your downfall, your demise. The cedars of Lebanon, figuratively, saying, since you were laid low, no woodcutter comes against us. Now, what's interesting about what Isaiah is describing here is how the Babylon system artificially suppresses the strength of any opposing authority or any authority that would be seeking some sort of independence or individual liberty from the Babylon system. That Babylon system comes alongside any tree that tries to branch out as its own kind of competing authority and just cuts it down. But no more. Now the nations are liberated from the Babylon's oppression. Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you. Ooh, this language. It rouses the shades to greet you like of its house. All of you who were the leaders of the earth, this system, this centralized authority that's mercilessly exploited the vulnerable, the elites that have been in charge of this system, Isaiah describes them as the leaders of the earth and the kings of nations. Look, all you who were leaders of the earth, it raises from their thrones all who were the kings of the nations. It's dethroning them. All of them will answer you. All of the oppressed nations will answer those elites in that day and say, look, you've become as weak as us. You're just like us. Now, where is all of your status and power and control? Now you are the ones who are under the boot. But now you're under the boot of the Antichrist, which is not great. But there's more to be said about that, because not only will the Lord use the Antichrist to judge Babylon, but then the Lord will turn, as Isaiah described in chapter 10. We looked at this last week, and he will judge the Antichrist for his arrogance and his destructive ambition. Here we go. Verse 12, how you are fallen from heaven, O day star. Now, commentators agree. The chapter has shifted. We're not just talking about a plural subject of a Babylonian system. Now we're talking about a person. And it stands to reason from the rest of the text that this person has been the instrument of God's judgment. It's the person who God has used for that judgment against Babylon. But God pronounces judgment not just for Babylon, but for that arrogant, wicked leader as well. How you have fallen, O day star, son of the dawn. These are labels that are typically given to Satan, but it's not just Satan, it's his offspring. Now remember, is this in the notes? You bet it is. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, the very first mentions of God's redemptive plan were actually spoken to Satan when the Lord said, I will put enmity between you, speaking to the serpent, and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. And then Psalm 82 elaborates on this even more. When the Lord is sitting in judgment of a heavenly court, judging heavenly beings, judging the offspring of Satan and his followers and his loyalists, both on earth and in heaven, meaning demons and principalities and wicked powers. And in Psalm 82, there's judgment that's declared. This says, I have said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you, but nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. And here it is here. In Isaiah, I kept wanting to say Psalm, but Isaiah 14. So how you have fallen, O day star, son of the dawn. Could be speaking of Satan himself, but goes on to describe the actions of the Antichrist and judgment of the Antichrist. And really, there's almost like a personification of the Antichrist representing Satan himself. Look at this, how you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. Now, what was that? Well, we saw some of that in chapter 13, but there's going to be more descriptions of that later. But the Antichrist will have laid the nations low, will have committed an act of aggression and conquest that brought trouble to the nations. Not just a nation, but to many nations. The scope of this is large. I don't think Isaiah 10 admitted that he had a successful global conquest, because there are resistors. But nonetheless, his ambition is global. He's just not allowed quite to get there. Really, what the Antichrist would seek to do is basically a counterfeit kingdom, counterfeit messianic kingdom, or anti-messianic kingdom, actually overthrowing the covenant of Israel and then claiming a global conquest from there. That's why he strikes at Israel. But as he strikes at Israel to claim his global conquest and victory, he gets a surprise. And here it is. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of the assembly. What's that mount? I mean, he's saying, I'm going to the top. And, people have argued that this could be a resurrection of Babel. But I think the ambition of this is, I will set my throne on high. I don't know. I think he's wanting to usurp or he's wanting to supplant what would be the mountain of Zion, the role and God's chosen authority that's given to Zion. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. In the far reaches of the north? Okay, wait, maybe that's somewhere else. I need to do more study of that. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High, which is what they said with the Tower of Babel. Let me look at my notes. The Antichrist embodies the arrogance of Satan to the extreme, claiming to be worthy of worship, greater than God. Now, this is where the Antichrist really is claiming, like, I am meant to be worshipped. I am higher than the Most High, kind of thing. Isaiah parallels Satan's arrogant and destructive attributes fully embodied in Satan's chosen anti-Messiah, the Antichrist. Okay, I didn't put anything in there about the mountain of the north, so maybe that's not super certain yet. I need to go look more into the commentators of that to verify that. But if any of you have insight on that, it might just be a figurative thing. But I will ascend above the heights of the clouds and make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble? Again, for them to say that, the Antichrist will have had to make the earth tremble. So you've got to understand, Isaiah is speaking from the perspective of a person who's been delivered, who's now in the Messianic age. But what they're referencing are events that happened prior to that in the tribulation period. So is this the one who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world like a desert, who overthrew its cities, who did not let his prisoners go home? That's dreadful. Even though now we're at a victorious point, I mean, for them to have had to endure this is terrible. It's disheartening. And all the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb, but you are cast out away from your grave. The point here, getting to the end, is that the Antichrist does not receive any kind of ceremonial burial, but will be cast into the land of perpetual desolation, which John the Apostle will later call the lake of fire. You will go down to the stones of the pit, like a dead body trampled underfoot. You will not be joined with them in burial, because you have destroyed your land. You have slain your people. May the offspring of the evildoers nevermore be named. Prepare for slaughter his sons because of their guilt. Now, all of these loyalists, and even he kind of cuts back to Babylon, but we have the offspring of Satan, and this pronounced judgment of their permanent demise, lest they rise again and possess the earth and fill the face of the world with cities. But no, now we get to Babylon as well. And I will rise up against them, declares the Lord, and I will cut off from Babylon name and remnant, descendant and posterity, declares the Lord. I will make it a possession of the hedgehog and pools of water, the scavengers, that kind of thing. I will sweep it with a broom of destruction. What interesting language. But declares the Lord of hosts. Again, that cannot have been fulfilled because we still have descendants and posterity from Babylon today. So this is looking at something greater than what happened in Isaiah's generation. An oracle of the Lord concerning Assyria. Now, at this point, just a quick reminder, we're going to speed through this because I can't believe I've only done 2 chapters, but that's the problem with Isaiah. I'm just going to go a little bit long. You'll just have to accept my apology. But when we get to this section, a couple of sections of these chapters, Isaiah is addressing the present conflict of his generation using the principles of the redemptive plan that transcend his generation. So he's pulling the narrative into his day and applying it appropriately. And we want to just take a little quick look at that. Now, again, this is agreed pretty substantially to have been fulfilled in Isaiah's generation or shortly thereafter. But because here we're looking at what would be the defeat of Sennacherib's army in 701, which is described later in Isaiah, in his own book. But the reasoning that he uses to explain this transcends that. And so let's jump down to, let's say, verse 26 and 27. The Lord's going to, of course, destroy Israel's enemies because this is the purpose. That is purposed concerning the whole earth. He's saying the reason why God is going to give us this interim fulfillment in our generation is because this is the purpose God has purposed for the whole earth. Not just for this, but that there is a final deliverance, which is why I wanted to come down and look at this. And this is the hand that is outstretched over all the nations. The way that the Lord destroyed Sennacherib's armies in 701 will yet be stretched out again over all the nations in a final way. Oh, that's remarkable. So we'll have to look at those chapters later. Is it Isaiah 36 and 37? It's somewhere over there. But essentially, the angel of the Lord stands over 130,000 troops and just poof, destroys them like supernaturally. In what might have been a face-melting way. Where was that? Isaiah 13. A lot of people say, oh, their faces will melt. It's figurative language. Their hearts will melt. Where's the faces? Oh, it's in here somewhere. And, you think of, Raiders of the Lost Ark or whatever, but I don't know. Maybe that's figurative. Maybe it's more than figurative. All right, I'm supposed to be moving on. Oh, good. And then Philistia. I'm going to skip over Philistia. If you want to look at that, check out the notes. But there is a nice little, again, he ties it back. The reason why you can't just outright dismiss it as irrelevant is because here comes Isaiah with a hot take at the very end saying, wait, what will one answer the messenger of the nation? Which would be Isaiah. He's the messenger. The Lord has founded Zion, and in her the afflicted of his people will find refuge. Oh, I love it. It's just this messianic promise. Just poof, let's just throw that in there. So anyway, you can look at that in the notes later, but for the sake of time, I've got to move on.